Afternoon and good evening, and welcome to the AI for Good Global Summit. All year, always online. We hope that you, your families, and your friends are healthy and safe. My name is Bastiaan Kwast from the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union, and I'm joining today from Geneva, Switzerland, and I have the privilege of introducing today's webinar, Developing Sport, Developing World and Esports, Real Opportunity for Change, Growth and Prosperity. ITU is the United Nations Specialized Agency for Information and Communication Technologies, and ITU is also the organizer of the AI for Good Global Summits, which are held annually in Geneva, Switzerland, in partnership with 36 sister United Nations agencies, ACM, and co-convened with Switzerland. For today's webinar, we are counting on your active participation to create an engaging discussion. And for this, we will be using the Q&A functionality, which you can find just left of center at the bottom of your screen. And you can also upvote questions that are posed by others that you would like the facilitator to ask. Additionally, there is a chat functionality, which you can use to have discussions with other participants. Please make sure the message recipient is set to panelists and attendees instead of panelists, which you can select just above the message box. And with that, it's now time for me to hand it over to today's facilitator, LJ Rich. Hi, LJ, how are you?
Hello there, I'm good, thanks, and I hope you are all doing well too. Thank you so much to the ITU and welcome everybody to our fourth of 5 global sessions on esports. My name is LJ Rich. I will be your moderator for the next hour. I'm a TV presenter, music artist, and AI composer, and this is part of the AI for Good Global Summit, which is virtual this year. Throughout this panel, we love your interactions. Questions and chats are all allowed, even if you just want to say where you are watching from. We love to see it all. So thank you so much for choosing to spend the next hour with us. And my goodness, what a panel we have stored up for you. This panel is all about esports in developing nations. And with more than 3/8 of the planet who play esports, that number is set to increase as more developing nations get online. So how do we make this landscape welcoming, inclusive, and how do we do it responsibly? Well, once again, we have panelists joining us from across the globe. I've actually lost count of how many time zones we are crossing at the moment. Singapore, Canada, London, Geneva, California. So good morning, afternoon, evening, and night to everybody who is joining us and our fabulous incredible international audience. So today's panel will cover quite a few topics from AI in Africa through to short-sightedness, neurology, storytelling, and communication. So please get your questions ready. Please put them in the Q&A area. And I now get the opportunity to introduce our fantastic guests. We have quite a few of them today, lots to keep you interested. So please turn on your audio and video. Fabulous guests. That is Alex Sardo, Mo Durrani, Kaiser Kaderi, Nicholas Erenku, Anne Kelly Aikman, Jolene Latimer, Jackie Nunez del Risco Bahia. Welcome, folks. Thank you so much for joining. How are you today?
Thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure. Oh, great. I can hear all the microphones are working. This is a good start. If anyone is on mute, I will simply do this. And if you are if you are the person that's not doing this, please make sure your microphone is turned on. Okay, well, let's get going, shall we? We've got quite a lot to get through, and I'm very excited to hear all of your views and audience for your questions as well. Alex, let's start with you, shall we? Could you please take us through the economic impact of esports in Africa?
Yes, definitely happy to do that. And well, good morning, everyone. From here, I'm calling from California. And on the question, you see, esports professional gaming is a very new space in Africa, but it represents a great economic opportunity. We are going to need to create 18 million jobs annually on the continent over the next 10 years. So they're going to have to come from new places. The creative industry is proving to already be key. You know, people are familiar with music, movies, and those are taking off in Africa, employing millions of people and contributing over $4 billion of annual revenue. I think people should read about that. I see gaming and esports in the same space. And so I'd love to address the Africans listening. Please, I would love to inform you that there are over 377 million of you in the Middle East and Africa who are playing esports already, and it's contributing over $4 billion, right? And this year, in fact. And so with esports, it's not just about playing games. You could become a professional entertainer, like your favorite football player, and you get paid thousands to millions of dollars, and others can market their brand on your platform. It's a whole new space. I encourage you to not brush it aside quickly, but take time to learn about it. And there couldn't be a more exciting space than this panel with all these global pioneers who are going to talk about it.
Thank you, Alex. And within minutes, we've already got a question in our chat from Priyanka who asks, what is esports? Just as a very quick primer, it's like when you play a game on an app or a computer, but you play it against somebody else, generally in a public setting, although I think this has changed somewhat since our COVID-19 outbreak, but I think we'll get a chance to talk about that shortly. But esports is basically just like traditional sports, but it's using a computer instead of, say, a football, I guess. Jackie, could you give us examples of how esports have affected poor urban communities?
So sure, good time-based greeting to anyone who's joining us right now. Basically, when it comes to developing nations, and in the case of Dominican Republic and other Caribbean nations, esports is an equalizer. And we've seen local cases of how esports impacts urban communities, rural ones. And we've seen cases how, just like out of poverty, these kids, as a matter of fact, a 17-year-old in 2018, 2 years ago, started just training himself, self-taught himself English because he didn't learn it in school. And little by little, and winning really small tournaments, he actually escalated in this, ladder of needs. And he rented consoles in the beginning, then bought a used one, with the proceeds from his local tournaments that played in his neighborhood. And then he came to become the world champion in Street Fighter V at Capcom's Pro Tour, and earning $250,000 on a check, and from one day to another one. And obviously that has a huge impact in the lives, not only of his life and his family's, but his neighborhood. And because they actually, what they do is that they use the things that they earn to help their communities, and saying, okay, so I got this opportunity and maybe I should pay it forward, and see how I can help other people that are just talented like me and young and just need help with that.
I think that's a fascinating story, and I suspect it's mirrored with traditional sports. It's like talent is one thing, determination is another, and accessibility is also all important in order to practice. How do you know you're good at something unless you try? The official from the Global Esports Federation, the official definition is organized competitive video gaming. That's much more concise than my kind of long and rambling version. Thank you very much for that. Okay, so obviously we're in really interesting times here, because I think for a lot of people, some people watching, they may never have seen esports video or people kind of doing commentary. It's compelling. It's quite sort of, you're drawn in. And so I think this means that we're spending even more time on our machines. And one of the things that we wanted to talk about during this panel was actually myopia and vision. And I think that becomes ever more relevant in developing nations. So Mo, let me bring you in on this. Let's talk about myopia. It's short-sightedness, and it's a growing issue, with some studies predicting nearly half the world are going to be dealing with it. So tell me more, what are the implications?
Yeah, so hello from Singapore, where there's almost 4 smart devices per person here in Singapore. So the penetration and adoption of smart devices, whether you're in developed world or developing world, is very high. And of course, people are accessing the internet in all corners of the world. Now, I think as esports evolves and technology advances, we're very much about pro technology, but we want to look after our athletes. So I think it's really important that the health element, particularly that of the eye, is considered, because they are spending up to 8 to 10 hours per day looking at screens. One of the implications is the correlation between screen time or screen exposure and nearsightedness, or myopia, if you like. There's about 2.6 billion people with myopia right now, and there's evidence that it's growing, particularly during the digital era. So it's no longer this misnomer of it's an Asian disease, it's a global epidemic. So even in the US, Australia, and so forth, the prevalence has doubled in the last 20 years. And we know in urbanized Asia, the prevalence can be as high as 80% once they're done with secondary school. It's a big problem that needs to be addressed. Now, the good thing is that it can be. And as we sort of move forward, we know that by 2050, there'll be 5 billion, half the world's population. Now, what's important is that 1 in 5 will go on to develop high myopia, putting them at risk of sight-threatening diseases. So this is quite serious. So I think to keep them healthy, we need to ensure that there's education and we raise awareness on eye health, regular eye checks, responsibly using devices to ensure that we reduce the risk factor, delay the onset, and slow the progression of myopia is absolutely critical. It's also very important that we ensure that our athletes right now can actually be great ambassadors for the world to get people into regular and timely eye checks. The earlier we detect eye diseases, the better chance we have at managing these conditions. So although the finances and the reimbursements look fantastic, we've got to ensure that the longevity of these athletes is a healthy one, because we know that they're getting counseling for the mental health. We know that the physical activity is an element. So to bring in the eyes bit, we can all enjoy watching these great athletes grow and the adoption in Africa growing as well, while we ensure we look after their eyes as well.
Kaiser, I can see you nodding along very energetically there. Would you like to join in on this conversation about short-sightedness, myopia?
I think, thank you. It's great to be here. And Mo did an excellent job of just summarizing kind of where we're at in the world. And he's right, it is an epidemic in the United States, you know, coming from California. In the last 3 decades, it's gone up to 40% from 20%. So it's doubled, as you mentioned. And, you know, the importance is when we think about nearsightedness, it you know, it's not just something that you're like, well, I can just wear a pair of glasses for. This is something that can lead to diseases, other eye conditions that can be blinding. And so there's a lot of things that we can do. It sounds scary, but there's a lot of things that we can do early on. And for all these professional athletes from all parts of the world, gaming is a great equalizer, as was mentioned by Yaki earlier, is that we want to make sure that they game responsibly. And some of the things that they can do, there's a rule called the 20-20-20 rule. I don't know if anyone's actually heard of it. So, you know, the Academy of Ophthalmology, the American Optometric Association, and a lot of global associations in the field of eye care talk about this. So for every 20 minutes of screen time, so whether you're a gamer that's participating or someone that's watching a gamer or just in front of screens for long periods of time, for every 20 minutes, take a 20-second break and look out at least 20 feet. And then also one other thing I just wanted to mention is there's, you know, in terms of managing it, well, what are some of the other things I can do? If you're a young gamer or someone that's, you know, or any age actually, for any period of screen time that you have, what we've seen from some of the studies that have been done, especially in Asia, some of the benefits of reducing the rate of progression of nearsightedness can be just as simple as spending at least 40 minutes outside a day for a week, or a total of, you know, so that's not asking a lot. It's like going for a walk around the block or being outside, but there's certain things that we can do today that can actually help.
Okay, thanks very much for that. It is an interesting situation, isn't it? I just imagined every single person watching this, by the way, to just stop and defocus their eyes to try and look 20 feet away for 20 seconds. And it's just trying to work out exactly what 20 feet is. It probably involves looking out of the window, I would imagine. So let's talk a little bit about traditional and esports. And because we rarely do one of these sessions without making this comparison, it both helps people who are unfamiliar with esports to come into it, and I think it also gives the opportunity for people to learn from esports. It's a nice kind of two-way thing. It's still a relatively new concept despite massive popularity. It's consistently one of the most watched live streams online. And so Anne, I'd like to bring you in, please. Hello, you've come from traditional sports, you're moving towards esports. So what's your take on responsibly communicating what's happening in gaming?
Thank you, LJ. And maybe I'd just like to maybe ask a question to Mo and Kaiser before I dive into the kind of the intersection between traditional sports and esports. And as a parent of a 15-year-old boy, so I'm kind of fast tracking my education into esports through the eyes of my 15-year-old son who's a gamer. But one of the questions I'd like to ask is, recognizing how important, eyes are. And I think as we do traditional sports, maybe we think a little bit less about our eyes, even though we use our eyes probably just as much in traditional sports. But what are some of the signs when we're actually gaming, or what are some things that we should be looking for as parents to make sure, we can get our kids or players to adopt that 20-20-20 rule, as you were talking about, Kaiser, or how do we look out for some of the signs that perhaps the eyes are suffering, or that our kids need to go in for a checkup? What are some of the things that we should be looking for?
If I may just sort of say quickly, besides sort of continuous use for hours upon hours, you can get migraine related type sort of symptoms, blurry vision, irritations of the eye, and also just habits of coming up close, squinting at the screen and so forth. So they're classical sort of signs you'll see. You must understand that some of these conditions can develop without really strong symptoms. And it's of particular concern for us teenagers, particularly to set an etiquette for the youngsters, because we know that 6-month-year-olds are getting exposed to about 45 minutes of screen time, and 2-year-olds are spending 2 hours on screens. And so it's really about shifting behavior and looking out for those signs, but also being aware that, as Kaiser said perfectly, we at Plano should have ensure that every 30 minutes there's a break for at least a minute and a half. And as Kaiser said, it's the protective nature of being outdoors is absolutely critical. That I'm not going to pretend I'm an expert with sedentary behavior, but if you're looking at a screen, it means you're sitting down for a whole heap of time too. So, but I'll leave that to the physical activity experts.
Yeah, there's just a couple of things. Mo said just nicely. A couple of things to watch out for is if they're rubbing their eyes, especially after games, or extended screen time. That does two things. One, it shows that they're having some type of irritation and or dry eye, because you don't blink as often when you're in front of screens for long periods of time, especially competitively. And then the other thing is, in terms of the migraines, I think we could all benefit in terms of doing certain types of stretches, because if we're in front of screens for long periods of time, it's really about how you position yourself, your shoulders back, kind of, keeping your head back as well. So just kind of keeping in a nice alignment, because when you bend forward, you're putting a lot of stress on these muscles here, which lead to the migraines. So there's a lot of tightening that happens here. And especially when you're when you're really into a match, your shoulders will shrug up, and you'll kind of, if you see your son like this, that's when you need to kind of stretch him back out. Yeah. When he's crunched up like that.
With your head forward like that. I mean, as a pianist, a concert pianist, we actually have quite a lot in common with the esports gaming, because we have to do a repetitive behavior over and over again, and if your posture is wrong, you can start to get kind of performance related injuries, and trying to get correct posture is probably quite good for anybody who does desk work. And I think what we're looking at in esports specifically is right now is vision and myopia, but of course that then extends out to all of our sort of health and performance. Hydration is a good one, for example. How often do you think I need to have a drink of water? Well, not so much. As you get older, it turns out you don't have the urge to drink as much water, and it's probably more important. At this point, Nick, I'd love to bring you in on here. I mean, you need to be quite physically fit to compete as an esports athlete, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, LJ, and nice to meet everyone. I've been in esports for 16, 17 years counting. Started as a semi-professional player, because 16 years ago nobody was a professional, right? Nobody really. It was early back, but and we today we support the training for a lot of players, and part of that exactly what you just said, LJ. I think for mental fitness, right, you need to have physical fitness as well, right? And the training is it's not just about spending all your time in front of a screen, right? It's all about looking at this as a holistic approach, right? Because someone mentioned about a responsible approach as well. I think for myself, I think it's been a privilege to not just kind of like have a historical view of the development of esports in my part of the world, here in Singapore, in Southeast Asia, as well as starting to look at what's been happening in the other countries. I've had a chance to look at what's happening in Brazil, Latin America, in Northern Asia, in the Middle East, and privilege of being part of GEF, right, and to support the ecosystem development, right, in countries, right. I think is when we look at the ecosystem development for esports, it's still nascent, right? Even though it's been around for a while, right? We look at everything from the health aspect, which we talked about just now, myopia, fitness, and all that, to learning development. We look at what are some of the career pathways, or even the adjacent skill sets, right? So I think it's a phenomenal time right now for esports, right? Just now you mentioned about from traditional sports or sport to esports. You know, someone told me, said, maybe as early back as last year, right? Esports was like, maybe it's a sport. Maybe esports was considered a sport. And now after like COVID, a lot of places were like kind of like people were stuck at home, and like maybe esports is the only sport, right? For a lot of people, right? And I think I've worked with a lot of players, and I supported a lot of players in their development and growth journey. And besides kind of like playing and being going on a path, a journey to become a professional player, a professional athlete, if you like to use that term. But we've also seen like the adjacencies, right? From the being digital first, tech first, the digital native, right? The skill sets around just about for esports being very fast and adept into like coding, into making games, into I've seen players go into careers in like cybersecurity, and I've even seen players go into careers in finance. And it's kind of like strange to draw the connection, right? And it's like there was a pro player. He was professional CS Counter-Strike player for a year, and then when he came back to Singapore, and he was like, I'm not sure what I'm gonna do. You know, I think I'm done with esports. And then he got into a career, a job doing high-speed trading, high-speed frequency trading, right? And friends and I were like, are we sure this, like, he's gonna keep his job, right? Is he gonna survive? Like, maybe we should be taking some bets, like how long he'll survive in his job. Not only did he do well, he became the most successful trader, right? In his company, right? And he overtook in his manager's words, right? He overtook the MBAs and some of the even and all that, and just doing better, right? So I think that there's a lot of potential, right, for esports. And I just wanted to highlight for our audience, especially, it's not just about playing. It's not just about playing. It's about everything else, holistic and responsible development.
Brilliant. Thanks, Nick. Jackie, I'm going to come to you in just a sec, because I just want to get Jolene's thoughts because of your experience in entertainment, sports, personal finance. You're across everything. So, what do you think about this idea of these transferable skills?
Well, I think that's the beauty of esports, and one of the most amazing opportunities for storytelling in esports, because they really do transcend a lot of different areas in our lives, which is really exciting for me as a storyteller. There's no lack of a bunch of, themes that we can dig into, plus little interesting, inspiring stories of people who have developed a passion for esports and then applied that passion in other areas of their lives. And I'm excited as a journalist for the opportunity, and I want to get more journalists inspired to tell these stories, because it's such a rich world.
Jackie, I know you wanted to jump in on this.
Yes. So Nick mentioned something about it's not just about gaming, right? And on the heels of that, and in the context of traditional sports and esports, creating a support ecosystem, just like traditional sports athletes count on, is of utmost importance for the sustainability of this. So esports has a very rapidly changing, environment. And what's big and new and number one in January, come March, April, there's something else. And so technology-wise, things change a lot, but there are things that remain constant, and are common denominators between traditional and esports, traditional sports and esports. And it's that support ecosystem in which kids or young people that are retiring at 24 years old, maybe a lot of people don't know this, but there are a lot of esports athletes, pro athletes, that are retiring at 24 and 25. They need something to fall back on. And having that support ecosystem, and that support ecosystem involves education, training, both mindfulness and physical dexterity, but also a psychological aspect and a professional part, the academic part. So when I start being an athlete, I want to keep being, productive and have a profession within this esports ecosystem. But if I'm not an athlete, then I'm nobody. Can I pick a career, in another area of esports where I can do this? And traditional sports athletes have this, and it's important that we work on creating these ecosystems for esports too.
I actually think that's probably quite good advice for anybody growing up now. You're not really, we don't expect to have one job. I certainly have never had one job at a time. I'm always doing two things, and the technology stuff is just went embarrassingly well as a backup plan for me being a musician. And I believe that there is this sort of transferable skills as long as you've got that determination, the tenacity. And I think we've got a question in here from Nolwen that says, can esport help young people learn and discover, as we explain, I think I'm just going to paraphrase here. How similar do you think the values are between esports and traditional sports? Who would like that?
I'll jump in first, and then anyone can.
Okay, then we'll have Anne afterwards.
Add in. I wanted to kind of like maybe respond to the question with a point that Jackie made about the rapidly changing environment, right? In esports, one of the things you'll realize is that the cycles are incredibly short. Right, not just about you can look at it from a few angles. You can look at it was console gaming and then arcade gaming to console gaming to PC gaming, and then now in many of the developing countries we're looking at mobile first gaming, and then now folks are speaking about when do we move to AR, VR, and all of that, right? That's which in GF we call active esports. That's one, but not just about the platforms, about the titles, right? And the issue is that in esports, you could be playing a game that's popular today, and tomorrow it may not be as popular, right, as compared to, let's say, a traditional sport. I think one of the questions you had earlier about traditional sports versus esports, and in a sport like, let's say, football, right, it's been around for decades or centuries, right? But in esports, you hardly find a title that has been around for more than 10 years. You can count them with one hand, right? How many titles have been around for more than 10 years? And because of that, then the kind of support which Jackie highlighted, right, and the kind of training has to be quite broad-based. And what happens, right? I worked with a young player. He was 16 years old when he became one of the world champions, right? And we put him through a development system, and then he was still in school. And when he became one of the top players in the world, he's like, you know what? I'm done with school. I'm going to quit. And I had to talk to him. It's like, hey, hang on, hang up. It's like, okay, you may be at the top of the world today, and you may be playing, but what if your game is gone tomorrow, right? You have to continue picking up skills and all that, which we finally managed to convince him to kind of like stay on and pick up a broader set of skills around and using esports, right, as a and the games that he likes as a way to interest him to learn about the industry, about the skill sets around like putting events together, about coding, making games, and all that. And sure enough, when he finished graduate with a diploma in our academy, that was also the same time that his game died, right? And then I chatted with him afterwards. I'm like, so how do you feel now? And he's like, oh, I'm glad I got this broader set of skills. Now I can switch to the next game, or I can do something else, right? So I think to the question about learning and discovering, esports is a first for a lot of digital natives, and the way they learn about the world through the friends that they make or the people they meet through esports. Anybody else want to add in, chime in?
I did the thing. I was on mute when I tried to say something. And I'm a professional. What hope is there for anybody? Anne, please, would you like to come in? I know you wanted to say something earlier.
I was just going to add about the team building. I think certainly, my experience in seeing young people play, even though many of them will play at home individually, I think there's a whole, digital community out there. And I think when they're playing particular games, I've seen sort of friendships develop online, or even just, within the community, about all the things that they share. And it's not just about playing the game, but it's about solving issues and curiosity. And certainly my experience with my teenage son is what that's brought out in him, and talking to other players and seeing how they come out at problem solving. So it's actually, they play for part of the time, but it's when they're playing for a couple hours, they aren't gaming the whole time. They're maybe gaming for an hour, and then they're looking at live streams, they're commenting to each other, and they're helping each other out. So I've seen a lot of crossover from traditional sports, playing with teammates. There is that camaraderie and sort of team buildings when they then go and play as a team together. I think that really does exist within that very strong sort of digital esports community out there.
Yes, I think actually it's
LJ, if I could add
yes,
to that a
of
little
course,
bit.
Alex, jump in.
Yes, this is a really exciting piece. It reminds me of like when I think to like the organizations in parts of Africa, like the Lagos what's it called? The Lagos Esports Forum and Ludic Works in Kenya. They've actually taken this angle where they try to promote mostly games that help people build like quantitative skills, as Nick was mentioning, that will then position them to maybe become like quant traders, right? And in addition to that, they're also looking at games that are built by even African publishers that start to help retell or tell some of Africa's old stories. There's like all this old, imagine playing games like Call of Duty or Tekken, but the background is with like the Kush Empire or the ancient Songhai Empire or Benin Empire. Very incredible stuff. At least that's my bias, is I try to support games that even tell some old African stories and help these kids see themselves in a new light.
I think that's wonderful, because I think now as well, we are in a world where the connections that we have with other people are more often than not digital. And I just noticed, everybody, it's time for your 20-minute screen break. So can we all look away for 20 seconds and focus on something 20 feet away? And whilst you do that, I'd like to say, for more info on all of our speakers, please type ITU AI for Good Gaming into your search engine, and you should be able to see everybody's details. These speakers are absolutely fascinating. My goodness, I'm kind of sad that we've only got 28 minutes left with you all, but we are getting quite a lot of information through. And thank you, fabulous audience, for your questions and chats and comments. It's really enjoyable feeling like we have this two-way situation, which when you're on stage, of course, it's completely different. So let's carry on. In terms of health and improving performance, Kaiser, can you tell us a little more about how those of us who live in the digital world can improve our health? I can see some questions regarding obesity and esports, and if there are ways that when we're doing esports, we are quite sedentary. So what can we do to counteract that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think it's our overall digital behavior. So I don't want to demonize esports.
Yes, you're absolutely right. I agree. Yes, it's not just esports, it's social media, it's spending time in front of the screen. Yes,
and it kind of goes along to a little bit of what Nick was saying in terms of actively being an athlete himself in esports. And a lot of traditionally the training used to be, well, get as much repetition in and as many games in as possible and so forth. So there's a lot of extended screen time. So it led to more of a sedentary behavior. So the way I look at health is very much related to behavior. So how do we change our mindset and our behavior in that sense? Well, what we're now seeing, we knew in traditional sports and what we're seeing also in esports. So it's all about performance. So how do we have how do we improve our performance or have a positive performance in all aspects of our life, right? Because a lot of people that are in traditional sports actually game, and a lot of people that are in esports play traditional sports too. So the thing is it's about having an active lifestyle. What we've seen, we've done some studies at Stanford with some of with different game publishers, and we've actually identified that with at least 2 hours a week, 2 to 3 hours a week of physical activity. So that's not a lot of time when you break it down. That's like, 20 minutes a day, 25 minutes. You can actually significantly boost your performance in actual gaming. So it's kind of showing that connection that, hey, if you're physically active, that's going to help the blood flow mentally, and also in terms of blood flow to the brain, blood flow to your eyes, which is like your most important organ in relationship to actually playing the sport. And then the other thing is that we've also noticed is screen time. There's a big question of how much screen time is too much screen time. And what we've seen in our studies as well is that roughly when you hit the average person, the person is most optimal between 2 to 5 hours of screen time. And then after the 5 hours, they tend to dip. So it's one of those things also to educate all our athletes, or just everyone in general, in the sense the importance of taking these breaks. So it's good to get in the repetitions, but it's also good to do it properly, because if you exercise at least 20, 25 minutes a day, that's going to help curb obesity. That's going to help curb, see, it's the indirect positives that you get from changing your behavior, right? It's not like, oh man, I'm gaining weight, I need to go do something. It's like, okay, I want to be a better gamer. You know, I want to be better in what I do. I want to be better. Like, so it's kind of changing the mentality. Like, how do I move my behavior? And the added benefit is I lose weight. I don't have, you know, I'm reversing my diabetes. Like,
I think that's the key, isn't it? How do we move and change our behavior? And I think that is a massive question for the human race that just widens out way beyond this panel. And hopefully this is an opportunity to start a dialogue for everybody watching. You know, how would you like to be different? And every day that you do something different is a positive day. I'd like to bring you back, Jolene. You're a professional storyteller, and this sounds like the potential for amazing stories of transformation, of determination, of triumph over adversity. How can we create content that really connects with other people?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that one thing we as content creators in this space need to be considering is how to engage not just the esports evangelists, but casual fans of esports and people who aren't fans yet, but need to be fans, because there's a lot of potential in this space, a lot of potential for good in this space. So how do we find those people? How do we find the women out there who might fall in love with esports, but don't know the stories yet, so don't know that this is actually something that could really hit home for them? I think a big part of that is really digging into the stories of the athletes, stories of teams, stories of people who are overcoming adversity through esports, and really committing to telling these personal stories, making people available to tell them, finding the storytellers who are going to be able to present them in the best light. And I think collectively, as we start to do that and do that kind of work, we are going to draw a lot more people to the space who don't even know that this is a space for them.
Brilliant, thank you. I've got a little bit of time.
if I can jump in, yeah, I just wanted to
go ahead, Nick. Actually, yes, you've
yes.
worked across so many different organizations. What do you think esports can learn from other industries? And
No, I think I just wanted to kind of like add to the earlier point.
oh yeah,
right?
go ahead.
Jolie mentioned about stories and the content. I just want to highlight that actually, it was a couple of years back, and I think the numbers have just shot through the roof during COVID. But the Twitch was talking about a per user or per gamer per day viewership of 100 minutes globally, right, per user. So like each gamer globally averaging 100 minutes a day, and in Asia, that number was 3 times more, right? And it's just, you think about it, right? It's you're watching content. You're not just, it's not about playing. It's about watching others play. And then you're talking about like, and it goes into like other content around like stories and just the human interest and all of that, right? And I think earlier Kaiser mentioned about the research about 2 hours a week of physical activities. We should, in our esports training, we should be telling our players to exercise less. I'm just kidding, right? But you mentioned about the screen time of 2 to 5 hours, and just in some markets, like we know, like in Southeast Asia, like Thailand, I remember, right? They are kind of like talking about watching hours of about 6 to 8 hours a day, right, per player. And I want to add to that point about sedentary lifestyle, right? I think this is where technology can come in, right? We're talking about AI for good, right? We're thinking that actually, even as we're talking about behind the screen and all that, we're starting to see innovations in AR. We're starting to see innovations in VR, right? And GF has been right at the forefront of pushing active esports, VR, and all that. And I think that's where even for all those in our audience, right, that are working on some of the latest cutting edge technology, right? There's so much possibilities, right, where technology can take the players out of the chair, right, in out there and being active and all that. And I think this is an area to watch. And I think I believe, and and myself and some of our colleagues in GF will actually be pushing the frontier on this.
Thank you, Jackie.
So Julene mentioned something about storytelling and the entertaining part about these stories. And we've seen 2 big challenges when it comes to massifying esports in other segments of the population. And in the beginning, there was the dichotomy of, well, how do we explain this? And we ended up figuring out that we don't have to explain anything. We just tell these stories of these kids that, you know, from the slums to world champion, the trials and tribulations of a 17-year-old who became world champ against all odds, and making sure, because people connect with all these things, you know, coming of age stories, rising from the ashes, you know, had nothing and has everything today. And that was the first challenge. And the other one that we saw with storytelling was, you know, and anyone that does media interviews and stuff and has to do with esports, I'm sure that has been asked these questions about, you know, parents where addiction and how do I make sure that, you know, my son is going through the right path, or I'm not, you know, cutting his wings if, you know, he has some talents that I don't know about, and, you know, maybe he's a pro player in or a diamond in the rough, you know. And the way that we did it was picking the right words and choosing words carefully when it comes to communication with your kids, making sure that you know what they're doing, and there's a very fine line, but it's pretty clear if your son plays for entertainment, or if your son has some potential, you know, to become something else, because there's a discipline behind it, because you're treating it with the same respect that you treat any other extracurricular activities for traditional sports in your household. And these things, thanks to the storytelling and to choosing the right words, is we've seen some success in that sense, because people, the psychology of the consumer says that we don't accept the things that we don't understand. And even more so if we don't understand how they actually work. So they'd rather say that I don't need it and that I don't want it and that I reject it before saying I accept it and I agree with it. So that's very important that you know, it's done in any country that wants to massify in any way, shape, or form the esports industry to other segments.
And I think just to jump on that, one important note is that for storytellers, it's about telling stories of everyone who plays the game. So your son and your daughter. And you know, there might be less women involved in esports right now, but really giving everybody who could possibly be interested in esports somebody who looks like them and has a story about them that you can follow.
And Jolene, while I have you, let's talk a little about supporting journalists in the developing world. How do we help them to tell these stories? How do they access interviews? What thoughts do you have around that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think one of the good things about esports is that it is so accessible. So especially for any developing journalist, it's a great opportunity for them to hone their skills. And I think getting more people just in the mix and doing it, and providing people with editing support, providing people with story ideas, connecting journalists to athletes, having panels where they can actually ask questions or, you know, just get a chance to know athletes. I think that's the key to getting more journalists in the developing world covering esports.
Brilliant, thank you. Kaiser, do you want to add something at this point? I just see a note on the back channel WhatsApp group.
Oh, is in relation to human machine interfaces. I don't know.
Oh, brilliant, because that is the next question. It's smooth around here, isn't it? Yes, we're going to talk a little bit about the future. We know that the brain interface is possible. Headsets can pick up your brain waves, your visual cortexes, if I remember rightly, just to the back of your head. And I, for example, have worn a brain cap where if you look at certain patterns on a screen, it can send out different signals from the back of your head. So there's already ways to communicate directly from the brain. MIT have a sub vocalization device that allows you to literally think instructions, and the device, which attaches to the jaw, picks up micro movements in your jaw because you kind of say things under your breath, as it were, and then that can be turned into voice commands. So you can think 4 + 4 and the device will tell you 8. So we're kind of at this really strange point now. VR, AR, AI, they're beginning to seep into every corner of the user experience. So what are the limits of the human machine interface? Where do we think we're going? And we are looking as well at esports and esports in developing nations. So Kaiser, over to you. What do you think?
I can be very passionate about this, so you guys can stop me at any point in time. I can go on, but what you're talking about is, you know, right now we're at at a tipping point in some ways. I think people have been talking about digital natives and this concept of like, you know, we've been connected, and gaming kind of connects the global community, but now you're getting more connected with the machine in the process. And so when we think about machines, even our mobile devices, we interact with it every day, but they're limited in their capabilities of interacting back. A lot of that changes when you get into virtual reality and augmented reality, because you start getting sensors. You just talked about some of them, LJ, and like these are now going to be put into everyday devices we'll be using for gaming. And so what's neat about that is not only does it add to the gaming experience, it's ways for us to get to learn more about how humans interact, and being able to take those types of data points and being able to use machine learning to be able to then have machines perceive and understand human behavior, so then they can respond back. So then they can help, the machine can start, it can be a two-way direction, because right now you can talk, you can search on your phone or on a laptop, you can do all these things, and you know, it starts understanding your behavior, but it's not able to give anything back to you. Like you can ask Alexa something, or like Google Home. And right now, artificial intelligence is very task intelligent. How do we make it human intelligent? I think the gateway to that is gaming, because, you know, we have cameras on, we have audio sets, we have, you know, a little bit of everything. And a little fun fact, because you're talking about the visual cortex. Did you know that your eyes are embryonically part of your brain? So really a brain-computer interface is all of us doing what we're doing right now. We're interfacing with the screen. There's cells in the back of our eyes called retinal ganglion cells that both Mo and I could bore you to death with. But, but technically that's part of your brain. So there's a lot of this research being done at MIT. I gotta tell you in other places, but at Stanford Human Perception Lab and at the Stanford Institute for Human-Centered AI, this is something intimately that we're working on across campus. So how do we create these types of technologies and harness these types of new experiences that you can get, you know, gaming is early adopters, but how do we do it in a way where we're actually improving humanity in the process? And how do we kind of put the ethics and, you know, it's called AI for Good Global Summit for a reason. So, you know, that's our purpose, is harnessing this to improve the gaming experience, improving the human experience, you know. Sorry, like I said.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I mean, we're all complete nerds around that stuff. And Mo, I suspect that you are champing at the bit to join in on predictive AI, right?
Yeah, just quickly. So for the audience that are interested in the in a review paper, the British Journal of Ophthalmology, that really summarizes all these population-based studies across the world that have shown a positive correlation between screen time and myopia. You can go off there and get it. I think it's free access. So I think there's the professional evolution that's going to happen in making sure that the athletes get the best possible treatment and management and exposure and so forth. Then there's also the economic costs, so the benefits of gaming, but there's also the human cost. So we know that with myopia, it's going to cost us about $1.7 trillion by 2050. It's already costing us about $700 million currently in direct costs. So it's important that we realize that this is going to be on government agendas. So how can we tend to look back retrospectively, but in actual fact, we've got decades and decades and decades of data. So what can we do with that data to better understand how do we cater for our professionals? How do we get them into eye care when they should be in eye care? How do we ensure that we can reduce the economic burden of health costs associated not just with myopia, but other things? How do we ensure that they're not retiring at 24 years of age? What profile is more likely to have a short gaming age life? What profile is more likely to have? So I think you get where, so using data and profiling and then predicting what we can do and be able to intervene before, you know, because we know our kids are adopting this technology at 2 or 3 years of age. So at Plano, we're incredibly excited about how can we use smart technology, predictive analytics to get people into eye care, to intervene using technology to change behavior, and then also to allow parents to better map out the management of their child's eye care, not just for a year, but for 20 years ahead. That's where data really excites me. And for the benefit, obviously, of the professional, economic, and health costs in the next 10 to 20, 30 years.
Thanks, Mo. Yes, we're talking about the SDGs, which is all part of AI for Good. I'm going to try and get through some of your copious questions, audience. You appear to know quite a lot and want to know quite a lot, which is absolutely my kind of audience. We have one here from Michelle that says, what about the legal status of esports around the world? Are there countries who consider esports as sports from a legal point of view? Jackie,
So,
I think this one's yours.
Sure. Yeah. I can, before I share my experiences in that respect, the Ukrainian Esports Federation, a couple months ago, I think it was in July or August, successfully submitted a request for the Ministry of Sports to include esports as one more discipline, like any other, in the registry of sports of that nation, and they did so successfully. So, in terms of public policies, that I think that is one experience. In our experience right now, as we speak, we are working with the legislative branches in our government, especially young ones that were just elected and had it in their legislative proposals for the electorate. The fact that esports is a tool for upward social mobility. That's actually the point of view that we are using and that we are leveraging in terms of creating public policies around esports and legitimizing esports. Because right now, an athlete for any sport has certain support ecosystem and visas and special tools at his disposal to make sure that he reaches the heights that his talent permits, right? And in the case of esports, that's not the case. We've had, esport players that, for example, two women that were denied, and not because they were female, but they were denied their visas, and also a couple of guys too. And this happened because they were requesting tourist visas. And whereas right now in the United States, there's something called the P1 visa, which is specifically for video gamers, for esports players. And in the context of the Dominican Republic, right now we are pushing towards the creation, either one or two things. Either the insertion of esports within the broader sports law in the country, or a specific esports law. And since right now, we attended the Esports Regulatory Congress in Barcelona last year, and one of the things that every single nation, both developed and underdeveloped nations, agreed upon is that esports cannot be regulated from a general global point of view because it's so different culturally, nation to nation. So one of the things that we agreed upon there was that if we actually have the opportunity to make esports legal in our country, or legal recognition, is to just leave it as a broad, aspect of esports. It's just like any other sports. It has the same treatment and the same benefits that any other esports player, and obviously upholding the values of the Olympic movement, fair play, diversity, and all the others. And so basically that's where we are. The same thing applies to Colombia. Colombia is in that same, phase. And yeah, I think that answers the question.
If I can just add quickly, from the Asian perspective, right? It's no longer about if, right? It's about when. And many jurisdictions, many countries in Asia have really kind of like put esports under their sports ministries, their sports agencies, and under their national Olympic committees. Perhaps just one example, right? We have this games in Southeast Asia called the SEA Games, which is like a official games, right? And which is sanctioned with the Olympic Council of Asia and all that. And esports was listed as official sport item, right, last year, and many countries competed. So there's many examples, right, of how many countries are now kind of getting treating esports like a sport. Yeah.
Okay, thanks, Nick, and thank you to Jackie. A question from Bhavanesh. Actually, there's quite a few questions, but I'm just going to focus on one. Specifically for the African market, are the main opportunities in mobile? Question. Alex, do you want to go for that? I can see you've unmuted.
Oh yes, definitely. That's where we're seeing a lot of growth is in mobile. right? Africa is like the mobile first continent with most things from fintech, right? Loads of like innovation in the fintech space coming out of Kenya and other parts, and mobile gaming is really big. It's helping a lot of these people get past some infrastructural issues that they might have otherwise, right? Thinking about the cost of acquiring game consoles or powerful rigs or computers, or thinking about infrastructure challenges with like electricity. These are things you find in a number of countries. And so people have been able to get past them using their mobile phones, which there's a huge mobile penetration on the continent right now. And so that's how you're able to explain numbers that there, over 370 million people playing games on the continent is because they're able to use the mobile phone, right? Knowing that there are about 1 billion people on the continent. A bit I'll just add there before Posse, who has comments, is revenue-wise, in other parts of the world, in-app purchases appear to contribute over 90% of revenues in the space. I read this somewhere. It's good to check it out. But on the African continent, that only got enabled not so long ago. So that is something that people should particularly look into, right? Startups that are helping enable this. The Google Play Store was one of the folks in the way before. They wouldn't allow payments in the African continent, but that's just changed recently. So I expect to see the $5 billion that was projected for 2020 to increase over the next couple of years with changes like this.
Brilliant.
Again, if I can add one thing, LJ, because I spoke to a company called
Make it quick, Nick. We've only got 6 minutes and we've missed a 20-second screen break.
I spoke to a company called Bolt, two Singapore entrepreneurs. They are huge in Africa. They did a lot of content and broadcasting around sports, and now they're moving to esports. And I think just echo the insights by Alex, right? A lot into mobile, but not just about the playing and the consumption, but also a huge community of streamers in West Africa. I think in countries like Nigeria, Ghana, Ivory Coast, right? And broad demographic from 15 to 35 years old, and very, I think, English speaking and very hungry to connect with the rest of the world. Yeah.
I can actually see some questions on the chat about Usman would like to start a legal forum in Pakistan's educational institute. We're looking at how to get affiliation or recognition with the Global Esports Federation. I think, Anne, that might be one for you. How can people get recognition?
Well, I think the way we're working, and maybe just to jump on the point earlier, and I think Nick made it, obviously a lot of the work of the Global Esports Federation is to build that sort of sports infrastructure, right, with each of the member federation, as Jackie explained in a lot of detail, to build up the capacity in each of the countries and how the sport will be run specifically. So I would say, to get recognized, it's about contacting your member federation or looking up in your respective country to see whether esports is being run through your National Olympic Committee, or is it a separate association? So recognition would start there at your national level of who the sort of the body that looks after esports within your country. That's the first step to recognition.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. I've got quite a few questions from Brigitte. I hope I'm saying your name correctly. One that's very interesting is, what do you think the hard and soft skills are that esport athletes develop? That one is probably quite a wide question, but what skills do you think people pick up when they play esports? Who fancies that one? Well, I can certainly say hand-eye coordination is definitely one, as a very enthusiastic mobile gamer. I mean, I would imagine with any situation, concentration, the ability to persist, problem solving, possibly when you're online working and cooperating with other people. But I think that's probably stumped our panel because they were thinking very large thoughts about everything else.
I
yes,
think LJ,
excellent. Mo, you've jumped in.
I was just going to say very quickly is, like every other athlete, even if you compare them to UFC fighters, stress management. Because remember, 10, 20 years ago, they only had a few hundred people watching them. Now they have thousands of people watching them. The amount of stress these guys must be under before they go out to perform must be phenomenal. So stress management as athletes would be certainly a skill set that they develop. They got coaching that's full time just to prepare them for these big moments.
That's a brilliant.
I'll say emotional intelligence or lack thereof. because I see athletes struggling with that time and time again. Even the most prolific, the world champions, there are very big opportunities. Some of it they actually generate it and develop it, but they lack a lot of it. And these are some of the soft skills that I think that are very important in esports.
I would just add the ability to process like large amounts of information very quickly. I mean, having played side by some of these sport players. And the other part is situated intelligence. I think they're able to make decision making on a fly that many people can't do, because they're able to do it so fast, because they have to make a lot of quick decisions. And across, doesn't matter if they're in an FPS or if they're in like a sport game or whatever. It's kind of interesting that they each can kind of even cross-pollinate across different games as well, but they can actually translate that into real life, as Nick was mentioning with some of these folks, because I know quite a few gamers that are really good in stocks or in finance or in just technology as well, and a lot of it just came from skills they learned from gaming.
Oh, thank you. And for anyone that's interested, and we're going to wrap up very shortly, there's a brilliant video on trying to create AIs that can beat human esports athletes, and it actually turns out to be quite a difficult thing. So that also is moving forward AI in its own strange way, the virtuosity of human athletes. Once again, everyone, a great session. We really appreciate your time and wisdom. Thank you to Alex Sardo, Mo Durrani, Kaiser Kaderi, Nicholas Erenku, Anne Kelly Aikman, Jolene Latimer, Jackie Nunez de Risco Mejia. Thank you also to the ITU for hosting the event, the Global Esports Federation, and the tireless work of the tech crew in the background. And thank you, audience, for your generosity in time and attention. It's been amazing and compelling reading all of your questions and looking at the chat whilst we've been interacting together. And I'm going to hand you back now to ITU. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, LJ. That was a great discussion. A big thanks to our panelists as well as to all the participants for making it so engaging. And before we wrap up, I would like to highlight a few things that may be of interest to you. This Thursday at 3 p.m., the grand finale of the Innovation Factory will be taking place. Next Thursday, the 26th at 2 p.m., we have a webinar on AI and financial inclusion. And finally, next Friday, the 27th at 2 p.m., as part of the Machine Learning for 5G Challenge, we have a webinar on machine learning to optimize 5G radio access network systems and to build the foundation of tomorrow's 6G wireless systems. You can find more info and links in the chat. You can also find all this information, as well as lots of other information and background material on aiforgood.itu.int. With that, we've reached the end of the webinar and would like to once again thank everyone involved, our panel, our participants, our facilitator, our partners, our sponsors, and co-convener Switzerland. And I hope to see you all on Thursday for the Innovation Factory Grand Finale.